Welcome back to Asian Art. In this lecture, we're going to continue our discussion of Islam, and we're going to talk about its arrival in India. In our first lecture, we talked about how the Islamic faith quickly spread across the Middle East, across Africa, and through much of Asia in the first few hundred years of its existence. It arrives in India some 200 years after the death of Muhammad, and it initially was a trading agreement between new countries. People adopted Islam to receive favorable treatment from Muslim traders from far away. Slowly, Islam gained in its influence and eventually would expand further into India through military conquest. The Delhi Sultanate, which was established between 1206 to 1506, established a dynasty after the destruction of the Buddhist Pala dynasty. The end of the Pala dynasty in the 12th century is really the end of Buddhism in India. It doesn't completely die out, but it no longer enjoys the kind of royal patronage and wide public support that it had in the past. The Delhi Sultanate establishes itself in the city now known as Delhi in the north central area of India, and there they very quickly consolidate their power by sort of imposing their will upon the Hindu majority. The Delhi Sultanate built its first mosque, the Quwat al-Islam Mosque, which translates in Arabic, the might of Islam, and by destroying some 27 Hindu and Buddhist temples and stupas and using those materials to build their mosque. You could argue it was expedient rather than building it out of raw materials, which would have taken time. But the underlying message of this mosque was to impose itself upon the population. We can see that in the colonnade that surrounds the open courtyard within what remains of the Quwat al-Islam Mosque. We can see this colonnade is made up of several smaller columns stacked up on top of each other. Hindu columns tended to be fairly short, and so they were chopped up and placed in a way that they were made longer. Furthermore, any kind of depiction of a human being or any kind of depiction of any living thing was kind of chipped off the original columns because it was offensive to the new Muslim rulers. This is a classic example of iconoclasm, whereby the Muslim faith has done a great project to undermine religious practices of other faiths, as they're seen as an anathema to their own faith. At the center of the Quwat al-Islam Mosque was an enormous minaret, which still stands today. It is the tallest minaret in brick anywhere in the world, and it is the largest minaret in India. At 237 feet, this minaret is so tall that if you were to stand at its peak and were to shout, you would not be heard from the base. The minaret is so tall that it really does not function as a religious minaret, whereby the muazzin would climb the tower and call out to the local population that it was time for prayer. This is a standard feature in all mosques, today very commonly replaced by a strategic megaphone. But in this case here, the height and the majesty of the tower was again a symbol of the royal power and privilege of the Delhi Sultanate. You've seen a couple pictures now of this iron pillar that resides in the center of the courtyard of the Quwat al-Islam Mosque. Let's talk about this iron pillar. The Delhi Sultanate would be eventually overthrown by the Mughal dynasty. The Delhi Sultanate came from the Middle East and was a more strict form of Islam. The Mughal dynasty came from Central Asia. They too were Muslim, but they were more syncretic in their ideas and values, meaning they attempted to sort of assimilate and accommodate, rather impose their will on others. Shah Akbar was the first great Mughal emperor who had a full, long reign. His father, Humayun, was the one who establishes the dynasty, but he dies early on, and it was Shah Akbar who sort of inherited all of his father's belongings. This is a tomb to Akbar, built in 1613. The Mughal dynasty wanted to impress, and they wanted to impress not only the local populations with their might and power and their prestige, but they were also world traders and travelers. They were interested in what was happening elsewhere, far away. And so by building these giant tombs, it was a way of kind of celebrating their reign and cementing their history as significant people in the region. Following the tomb of Akbar, there was a tomb to Humayun. As you could see, this is a red sandstone facade, meaning the basic structure, the red, is a soft stone, and it's inlaid with white marble, just like the tomb before it, creating these wonderfully graphic patterns inlaid with these beautiful white marble. Here we see a dome that sort of brings about a feeling. If you're familiar with the Taj Mahal, you might be already seeing elements that will emerge later in that very famous building. But it would be the job of Shah Jahan, several emperors later, to build what would become the most famous of all tombs of the Mughal dynasty, one that has never been surpassed. He built this in memory of his dearly departed wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died in childbirth after giving birth to 14 children. Mumtaz Mahal was a close confidant and a woman who was a powerful force at court. He was said to have traveled to the battlefield with Shah Jahan and kept him in constant company. To build this amazing mausoleum, Shah Jahan spent 20 years planning, building, using only the finest materials. And instead of building a red sandstone structure inlaid with white marble, he built an entirely white marble structure inlaid with semi-precious stones. And this is what chiefly distinguishes the Taj Mahal from other of the Mughal tombs. The Taj Mahal is a spectacular building, one of extraordinary size and dimensions. At a distance, it rises up off a flat plain and feels perfectly proportioned, rests and is a symbol of perfection. Notice how the dome is now higher and more grand. The minarets are almost as tall as the great minarets of the Qutb Minar in the Quwat al-Islam. But instead of going above that height, they're just slightly shorter. Here is a plan view of the Taj Mahal, which you can see on the center, on the right. And as you approach this, you walk through a garden on the left, you'll see, and you come to a courtyard, area number 4. You walk up some steps to a gatehouse, and the gatehouse is an opportunity to frame and see this building from just the right place and vantage point to get its full effect. So as you approach the Taj Mahal, you may have caught a glimpse of it, but you really don't get the full impression of it until you walk through this gatehouse. Here is the gatehouse, as you can see here on the map. And it is designed much like the earlier tombs of the Mughals, in red sandstone inlaid with white marble. When you approach the Taj Mahal, it is absolutely overwhelming, its size and its extraordinary detail. If you look at the calligraphy along the opening to the main door, you'll see that it is not painted on, but it is in fact inlaid semi-precious stone. So to create this effect of this calligraphy, someone had to carefully chisel out the marble and then chisel very precisely the exact shape in this stone and then lay it flat in the hole made in the marble. This is an incredible artistic achievement, and it was a skill that in Italy is called pietra dura. In India, it is called pachinkari. No photographs are allowed inside the tomb, but these are two pictures that I found that are suitable enough to explain what you might see should you visit the Taj Mahal. You enter and you see right in the center this octagonal enclosure, which is a very finely cut marble wall. And in the very center, we see the tomb of Mumtaz Mahal. Slightly off to the left of Mumtaz Mahal is the tomb of Shah Jahan. To understand this arrangement, you must think of the history of this extraordinary building. Shah Jahan planned this tomb for Mumtaz Mahal, and so he set her tomb in the center. He was later deposed by his youngest son, Aurangzeb, and Shah Jahan spent the remaining years of his life in a kind of home exile. He had to, and eventually when he died, he was buried alongside his wife. And so Shah Jahan is the only asymmetrical thing in the entire complex of the Taj Mahal. Many people have pointed to this asymmetry to say that Shah Jahan never intended to be here, that this was an afterthought, that his youngest child did not deem him worthy enough for a proper tomb all by himself, that Shah Jahan had plans for an even more elaborate tomb for himself. All of these are not supported by historic facts. The idea most likely happened was Shah Jahan always intended to be buried here, and that he used the death of his wife as an opportunity to build his own tomb, in a way that if he had begun to plan and do it all by himself, just for himself, would have been sort of the equivalent of digging your own grave. And so this was part of what is why he is an asymmetrical element. He did intend to be buried here, and his tomb is not just a matter of happenstance or convenience. That said, the tomb of the Taj Mahal was so grand, so extravagant, and so opulent that it was Aurangzeb who was able to mobilize the religious leaders in the area against Shah Jahan, because he promised to be more austere and more humble before Islam and not make any more ostentatious tombs. Here we see a close-up of the minaret that I mentioned earlier is just a little bit shorter than the minaret of the Quwat al-Islam. This is a mosque on the site of the Taj Mahal so that people who come to visit will have a place to pray. It is located just off to the north, to the west of the Taj Mahal, pointing in the direction of Mecca. You'll notice that on the diagram there is an exact copy of this building on the other side of the Taj Mahal. That building serves no real function except as a kind of symmetrical counterpoint to the mosque on the west. And so we have this way in which so many things in the Taj Mahal have that kind of sort of excess by this demand for symmetry. Aurangzeb would have built one more tomb in a kind of hearkening back to the Taj Mahal, the tomb of the lady built for the mother of Aurangzeb's son, Adam Shah. This tomb, you can see, looks quite meager by comparison. It's not white marble, it's stucco, and it's sort of painted and dilapidated in modest form. Sort of speaks to the failing fortunes of the Mughal dynasty. The Mughal would rule over India for several hundred years more, but wars and a change in focus would slowly deplete their wealth, along with doing battle with the newcomers from Britain. Let's review. How was the Quwat al-Islam Mosque built? What is the significance of the iron pillar to Indra at the Quwat al-Islam Mosque? Why did Mughal rulers make tombs? Why was the Taj Mahal built? How is the Taj Mahal different from other Mughal tombs?